welcome to another episode. Today we will be doing a box by the name of Tombwatcher on HackTheBox. Medium level, Windows machine, Active Directory. This box was fun. Can't even lie to you. It had a very good attack pattern to it. Something that is very useful for sure for the certification, the CPTS, which is something that I am currently studying for. A lot of it involved, Active Directory enumeration, abusing privileges, things like that. It had this one linear straight line to essentially get a foothold onto the DC. So this one was really good, very straightforward, and let's get into it. So just gonna go ahead and start the machine here, and I already did an nmap scan, so let me just show you what we are looking at here, what we're messing with. So here we got some ports open, DNS, we got a HTTP port 80 web page here. We got port 88 Kerberos, of course, is an active directory machine, so it's more than likely going to be present. We got RPC, remote procedure call, got some SMB going on, got some LDAP, port 389, what else, 445, got some more LDAP going on, 3268, more LDAP, 3269, 5985, which is actually WinRM, which is definitely going to come in handy later on once we get into it. And then we just got some other ports here, some high numbered ports that definitely are worth looking at, but we'll see what happens. So I'm gonna keep this tab open so we can consistently go back to it whenever we need it. And now we have our IP address, which is perfect. Just going to jot that down in my notes so we know what we're messing with. Gedit. Close that out. Put this over to the side. Open up another tab. Alright, perfect. So yeah. We have multiple ports open, and before we get started, I just want to shine some light on, please do not make the same mistake I made when I first started out this box. When I first started, I was enumerating every single port, trying to find a foothold for like about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe tops. And then until I got to the point where I wasn't finding anything, and for a good reason. When you go back to the page, you see that HackTheBox actually provides you with some credentials. So that was completely my fault. I wasted about an hour trying to find some valid credentials, couldn't find any. And of course, sometimes when you are doing machines, HackTheBox does go ahead and give you a valid username and password. So do not make the same mistake I made. So we do have valid credentials, which is fantastic. So when you have valid credentials, the command that I like to run first is, of course, either netexec or crackmapexec, one of those two, just to be able to test out where those credentials are actually valid throughout the environment, right? So we got netexec here, and let's just see, where these credentials work. So let me just write down the credentials as well. Got the IP address, got the username, and we have the password. Exactly what we want. So yeah, let's just try this out, man. Let's just try SMB first to see what we're messing with. Got Henry. And we got his password. And then let's just, of course, we got to specify the IP address. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so let's test it out, see what we can get. Looks like we have to run a certain command first before anything. Try that again. Alright, perfect. So, okay, so it looks like we have SMB access with the user Henry. Very good. And then we can further enumerate this to see what else we can possibly see. Maybe the shares. See what kind of shares are going on within the server message block protocol. And here we can see we have a couple shares here. We can read the IPC, net login, and sysvol shares. Definitely worth taking a look at it just to see if we can find any valuable information. We also want to run a command to see if we can see any users within this protocol. Okay, yeah, so we got some users that are coming up here. Enumerated 7 local users. We got administrator guests, the Kerberos account, Henry, Alfred, Sam, and John. So these are definitely some important accounts to jot down in notes just to save for later in case we are able to possibly, who knows, maybe even Kerberos some of these accounts. Find some clear text passwords laying around and be able to test it throughout all these other accounts. These are definitely worth being able to jot down. And then we could also run another command, the RID brute command. Let's see what else we could possibly get. Yeah, as we can see here, we get a little bit more information. We still get the same user accounts, but now we got some information on the type of groups that are within this domain. Right? Of course, we got domain admins, enterprise read-only domain controllers, group policies, enterprise admins, DNS admins, password replication group. Yeah, this gives us a little bit more lay of the land of what's going on within this domain, what kind of groups are set up essentially. So this is some good information, right? And since we already have some users to test out, it would be worth trying to test them out on the Kerberos port, see if we can get any Kerberosing going on. But honestly, whenever you already have valid credentials within a domain, within an Active Directory environment, 90% of the time, you're always going to want to run Bloodhound, right? You want to be able to get a nice GUI representation of what's actually going on within the domain. And Bloodhound is really such a useful tool to be able to do that. So we're just going to go ahead. I'm going to show you the command to run in order to be able to ingest all the information through Bloodhound. Of course, you're going to want it to be installed on your machine, and then you would basically just run the command Bloodhound python hackd. You want to specify the domain, which is actually in the nmap scan. We have Tombwatcher.HackTheBox. Go, and then also whenever you run across a domain, you always want to add it to your etc host file. Very, very important, so your machine knows to resolve it every single time. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like. Yeah, so I already added it to my host file. I think the IP address is actually different now. Yeah, it is. So I'm just going to update that. Boom, there we go. Exit out. So now that's updated, ready to go, and we can do everything that we need to do. So getting back to Bloodhound, sudo bloodhound python, specifying the domain. Then of course you want to specify the name of the account, the domain user that you have. In our case it is Henry, and then the password, which would be right here. Then you want to say ns name server, then specify the IP address, and then you want to say tac all. Boom. Then you would just run this command, and then it would essentially ingest all the information within the Active Directory through LDAP, so then you can essentially upload it to Bloodhound, right? So I already have all those files ready to go, right? I'm just gonna show you. If you run an ls, once you run that command, you should have a bunch of JSON files within here to be able to put into Bloodhound. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start our Bloodhound so we can basically see what that looks like. Go for JConsole. As we can see, we are connected. So now we can go ahead and start up Bloodhound. Go navigate to my tools. Bloodhound. Just go ahead and run the executable. Oh, boom. There we go. Okay, cool. So this is how you're going to upload everything. Select all the JSON files, and then you just click open. And here we can see it's downloading all those files that we've collected. Once that is complete, we can go ahead and test out. Let's just see, Henry, and boom. So perfect. So all that data has been ingested within Bloodhound, and now we can go ahead and run some queries to see what's going on here, what permissions we have, and what we can essentially abuse. So the one I like to select is shortest paths to unconstrained delegation systems. Yeah, so like I said, here we see a pretty steady pathway right here, right? Henry, which is the account that we own, we see that it has some privileges over the user Alfred, which is write SPN, service principal name, and then Alfred has the add self privilege over the infrastructure group. And then if you are within the infrastructure group, you have the read GMSA password of the Ansible_dev account. And then that account has the force change password privilege over the user Sam. And then Sam has the right owner privilege over John. And then John can essentially remote into the DC. So this is the clearest path in order to get to the domain controller. Like I said, I mean, this box is fairly clear cut. I mean, nothing really too complex. We will just show and represent what it actually looks like in order to be able to get to the domain controller and get the root flag. So let's go ahead and start. So if you ever want to know how to abuse a specific privilege, you can just right click on the node, press help, and then you can look at Windows abuse, or you can look at Linux abuse. It'll basically tell you how to abuse the specific privilege that you're trying to abuse. And of course, as we can see, we need to run the command targeted Kerberos. Gives you a nice little description of what it does and how to do it. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's navigate over to our tools. do have the targeted Kerberos within our tool set, as we can see right here. So we're going to run the command in order to abuse this privilege, right? So the command is going to be sudo python 3 targeted Kerberos. Let's just run it just to make sure it works, which I think it should. Yeah, it works perfectly fine. So let's go ahead and put in some more of the it's tag D to specify the domain. We got Tombwatcher dot HackTheBox. Okay, tag U Henry, and then Henry's password. Let's go ahead and copy and paste. And then we can also specify the format we want it to be, which is going to be hashcat. And then let's just go ahead and specify the domain controller, which is going to be dc01.tombwatcher.hackthebox. And then we can just output it to alfred.hash. Okay. Oops. And then we can just go ahead and run that and see if it works. Okay, yeah, so as we can see here, it started running, fetching usernames from Active Directory and LDAP, and then we hit an error called Kerberos session error clock skewed to great. This is a very common error when it comes to interacting with Kerberos. So the thing about Kerberos is that it is extremely time sensitive. And when it says clock skew to great, what that's basically telling us is that the time on our machine, our local machine, is not within the necessary threshold of the KDC, which is the key distribution center. So when we're requesting a ticket from the KDC, we typically need to be within 5 minutes of the time of the KDC, right? If we're not within 5 minutes, it's not going to issue us a ticket. So we essentially need to line up our time on our local machine with the time of the domain controller. And in order to do that, we need to run a specific type of command, which is sudo ntp date tag u, and then you specify the IP address of the domain controller, which is going to be right here. I'm going to go back to the terminal, specify that, run that. Now you may need to do it a few times for it to work. Alright, as we can see, it didn't work right here. Gonna have to do it a little bit, multiple different times. Okay, so unfortunately, I am not able to get it this go around, but what you do need to do is run this command. It is going to take some time, unfortunately. I've dealt with multiple different boxes that had you do this to be able to set up your time within 5 minutes. It just acts a little finicky, unfortunately, so you have to keep running the command until it works. But then you essentially do get, a hash once it does work of the user Alfred. You get Alfred's hash, and then once you get the hash, of course, what you need to do is crack it. So I do have the hash. Hash out text. Yeah, so when you run the command, this is basically what's going to pop up. Alfred's hash. Once you get this hash, you can just crack it, and then you should be able to see the password. So let's just go ahead and let me just... Then we can just go ahead and run that. Alright, so it looks like since we already cracked it, it's not going to crack it again. So just ran the command to show what it is, and the password does come out to be basketball. So that is a command you would run in order to crack the hash, but we've already done it. So you see that Alfred's password is basketball. So that is another set of credentials that we have obtained. And now you know, it always is best practice to test your credentials. Every single time you get a new set of credentials, you want to test them to see where you have access and what do you have access to. But since we've run Bloodhound and we pretty much ultimately know what is going to come next, we can just go ahead and start with that, right? So we've got Alfred's credentials, his password is basketball, and now we see he has the permissions to add himself to the infrastructure group. So we can go ahead and see how that's done. Linux abuse. There's a wide variety of ways you can run the command. Another useful command you can run is called bloody AD, which is used to abuse Bloodhound permissions. So let's just go ahead and show you how that's done. So here I've navigated over to my bloody AD Python tool, and now we can go ahead and specify the command that is going to allow us to abuse the add self permission for the user Alfred onto the infrastructure group. So let's go ahead and do that. At Python 3 ad.py post. Let's go ahead and copy that again. Specify the domain. Tombwatcher. HackTheBox. Got Alfred. Let's do capital A. Password. Basketball. And then we just say add group member to infrastructure. And then we just specify its name once more. So here we can see now that Alfred has been added to the infrastructure group, we can go ahead and use the next privilege, which is read GMSA password. And basically what this is a group managed service accounts, which are special types of Active Directory objects where the password for that object is managed by and automatically changed by domain controllers on a set interval. The intended use of GMSA is to allow certain computer accounts to retrieve the password for the GMSA and then run local services as the GMSA. An attacker with control of an authorized principal may abuse that privilege to impersonate the GMSA. If you do some research on GMSA, you will find out that there is a specific command you can run in order to abuse that functionality. It is a script called GMSA dumper. You can go ahead and install it on GitHub. I am sure I already have it right here. Here we have GMSA dumper, and then we can go ahead and just run the command Python 3 dumper, specify Alfred again, basketball. Boom. Okay, so now we see we have some hashes for the Ansible_dev account, right? So now we can essentially see where we can use these credentials throughout the domain, right? So let's just see SMB, copy this account. Don't want to forget. Specify the domain controller, DC01, Tombwatcher.HackTheBox. Hack you. And then of course we can use the hash. That's something we can do. Instead of using, we don't even have to crack the hash. We can just use the hash itself to see what's going on to verify the credentials. And as we can see, it works, right? We have access to the DC with this account. So now that we have verified these credentials work, we can go ahead, go back to Bloodhound and see what else we can do next, right? So we see that the account that we now have control over has the privileges to force change password over the user Sam. So we can basically change the password of Sam. And that's very valuable because once we change the password, you can basically authenticate as Sam. So let's just go back to bloody AD, go back to our tools again. Whenever you use this command, you want to make sure you're in the Python environment. Basically allows you to run the command with ease. So you might have to install the requirements in order for it to run efficiently. But we can go ahead. Might not even need that. Bloody AD, apply. Tombwatcher. Copy the hash. Specify the host again, which is going to be DC01, Tombwatcher, HackTheBox, and then we can specify set password of the user Sam to test 1, 2, 3, 4. Why not? Let's just put a period. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Might actually have to specify Python 3, so let's just do that. There we go. Password changed successfully. Perfect. So now, again, every time we get some new credentials, again, let's test them out and see if they work. Exec SMB. Actually, I already have it. So let's go change this to Sam. And then change this to test 1, 2, 3, 4 dot. And it does. Alright, so now we have another user that we have just compromised by changing their passwords to something of our liking. Now that we have Sam, we now see that Sam has a right owner permission over the user John. And basically what right owner does, it allows you to modify who owns this object. So we can essentially change the owner to us and be able to do things like change the password or change his permissions or change his access control list. We can do a bunch of things to it since we have that specific privilege. So let's go ahead and abuse that as well. So same thing, of course, bloody AD again. This time we're going to change some of the parameters. Change the user, Sam. Here we got test 1, 2, 3, 4 dot. Delete this, and now we can run set owner John Sam. And that's basically going to change the owner of the user John to Sam. Let's run that. Old owner is now replaced by Sam on John. Since Sam is now the owner of John, we can basically change our permissions that Sam has on John. Preferably, we would like Sam to have generic all rights over John. So let's do that. Let's do add generic all. Now Sam has generic all rights over John. Perfect. And now let's just go ahead and change the password of John. Let's do set password John. And let's do test 321 dot. Perfect. So John's password has now successfully changed to test 321 dot. So now when we look back at Bloodhound, we see John is able to remote into the DC. Can PS remote, right? And normally when you see PS remote, that means WinRM. As we can see before from the Nmap scan, we did see WinRM was open, 5985. Always want to come back to your Nmap scans to make sure you're not missing anything. But now that we see, we could just test it out on netexec, honestly, to see if it works. John. And we could just specify WinRM and see if we actually have access. And we do. So let's go ahead and remote into the DC with John. WinRM. specify the IP address. User John, password test 321 dot. Put some quotation marks around that. And we now have access to the DC. So if we navigate around a little bit, and we can see, we do see the user.txt file. Perfect. So you type that out, user.txt, and there it is. Right. So just put that into your as a flag, and then you move on. Now we are moving on to the privilege escalation portion of the machine. Perfect. So now we have access to the domain controller. And of course, you want to do some digging around, see what you can find, see what type of files, maybe some credentials that are laying down. Just to save time, we do know the privilege escalation vector on this machine. Of course, you know, when you go back to Bloodhound, and you can go ahead and type in the ADCS at Tombwatcher.HackTheBox. Press that, press enter, right click it, and click on shortest paths to here. You will see that the user John, which we actually have access over, that's able to remote into the DC, has generic all rights over the ADCS, right, which is the Active Directory Certificate Services. I mean, generic all is always a powerful permission to have, but we see that he has generic all rights over the ADCS, which is pretty valuable. So since he does have this permission, we can go ahead and try to abuse it to the best of our ability. There is a command called certify-ad, right, which basically allows you to enumerate Active Directory certificates. So one of the first things we want to try and see is if there are any vulnerable certificates within this domain, right? Anything that we could possibly abuse, take over, anything that maybe have any outdated certificates on it, or some vulnerable permissions that we can abuse. So let's specify John again. Test 321. Specify the DC, put in the IP address, and then specify vulnerable stdout. Spelled that incorrectly. So it's looking like it's finding a bunch of certificate templates. Found one certificate authority, found 11 enabled certificate templates, and we got a little bit of information here. Wasn't able to check for web enrollment, failed to connect to remote registry, but it did give us some output. So as we can see, it looks like we weren't able to find any certificate templates, which is highly unfortunate, because in order to abuse certificates, we have to know what templates are being used, right? Templates are basically specified to us what we can do with those certificates. There's no point of being able to abuse a certificate without knowing what it can do, and that's basically what templates can provide with us. But there definitely is still hope, so we can go ahead and run another command that will allow us to download the certificates through text, right? So certify AD, find targets DC01, specify the domain, specify John again, DC IP, and then this time we can specify text file. Let's run that command. So here it's finding all the certificates again like it did last time, but here we get a specific interesting error where it says fail to look up object with SID. Very, very interesting. But here we got some of the output, the name of the file that it outputted to. So we can go ahead and cat that out. 2026 04 04152.txt. Let's cat that out. So if you look through here, there's going to be a bunch of different templates that we can look through. You will have to look through them one by one just to see which one stands out. But when you keep scrolling and you go down to the 17th template, we do see that we have an SID tailored to the enrollment rights permission. Right, and enrollment rights is a really important permission, because basically what it allows a user to do is to request certificates, right? And when you can request certificates, you can basically create another certificate with the ability of being able to impersonate a high privileged user, right? Someone that could potentially be under the domain admins group or enterprise admins group, right? Enrollment rights permission is a really crucial permission that hackers do abuse, right? We see here that there's an SID under this template, but this SID, or this user rather, actually doesn't exist. It looks like this account was removed simply because of the output that we got earlier. If we go back, the output here said failed to look up object with that same SID, which means that this account isn't even here anymore. But it looks like its permission wasn't removed, which is a mistake that IT management makes all the time, right? They remove users, but they forget to delete certain permissions that those users had. So we can go ahead and try to abuse this, right? Let's see if we can somehow restore that account, right? So if we go back to our shell, we can run the command to get AD optional feature, and we can use the recycle bin feature, which basically allows us to dig up any type of objects that have recently been deleted. Okay, here we go, feature, and we see it's distinguished named, and we do see here within this little parameter it says is disabled false, which means that this recycle bin feature is enabled, right? So now we can further enumerate it to see what's been recently deleted. Run the command get the object filter is deleted true. Include deleted objects properties parent object SID. Once we run this command, we should be able to see all the accounts that were recently deleted, which, as we can see, we have a user by the name of cert_admin with that same SID. So cert_admin is basically the account that is responsible for that template, right? And we see it's recently been deleted. So if we can find a way to restore this account and abuse that template, that would basically be our next step, right? So we can do restore -AD object identity. Let's grab its GUID, paste it, run that command, and now let's see if it's back alive. Get AD user cert_admin, and it's here. So we can see that it has now been enabled, which is essentially what we want. So now, since we are the user John, which has generic all rights over ADCS, we can basically change the password of cert_admin. So let's go ahead and do that. Set AD account password cert_admin password convert to secure string. Let's do test 456 dot, and then as plain text force. Let's go ahead and run that. Looks like it worked. That should be cert_admin's new password. And now we can go ahead and test that same certify AD command with our new accounts. cert_admin 456, and it does work. And now once we run the command, we can see that we now have some vulnerabilities at play with that specific template, which is essentially what we wanted to find. And we see here through the output, it gives us the most specific vulnerability, which is CVE of 2024 49019. And within some research, we can see exactly how we can exploit that vulnerability. There's actually a couple ways to exploit this vulnerability, but the main way is to run 3 separate types of commands, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste it. So the first command we have is this one. I'm going to go ahead and change some of the parameters. 456. I'm going to change the IP address, which is going to be 232.167. And everything else should be fine, but for the most part we can see that we're specifying, of course, cert admin, password, the IP address, the target, the DC, the certificate authority, which is really important. We have the template, web server, and then application policies, and then we have certificate request agent. So basically this command right here is going to request the certificate, which is the most powerful permission that we could be given, right? It's going to request it. Let's go ahead and run that. Once you request a certificate, it gives it to you under the name of cert_admin.pfx, which you are then able to request another certificate under the pretense of the administrator. Let me just show you what that command looks like. It would then be this, right? You would run this command to receive an admin certificate on behalf, right here, it says on behalf of Tombwatcher administrator. And then once you have the certificate on behalf of that administrator, you will then be able to authenticate with that administrator certificate. So let's just go ahead and run that command to be able to authenticate as the administrator. And then of course we get the clock skew to create again. So it looks like I was able to get the hash of the administrator after running the command with the administrator certificate that we have impersonated. And now it looks like we have successfully obtained the administrator hash. So once obtaining the administrator hash, we can go ahead and try to evil 1RM into the machine itself. Administrator with the hash. And it looks like we have finally obtained the root. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. Catch you at the next one.